All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and hello, and welcome to the American Family Insurance DreamBank, where we believe in the transformative power of dreams. I'm Jenna, and on behalf of DreamBank, we're thrilled to have you with us for today's event in honor of Women's Equality Day. For those who have attended our virtual or in-person events in the past, welcome back. For anyone that is joining us for the first time, I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to DreamBank. Here at American Family Insurance, life's better when you're under our roof because when you feel totally supported and protected, any dream is possible. That's why we created DreamBank, an inspirational community destination and virtual experience designed to help people pursue, achieve, and protect their dreams. At DreamBank, there's something for every dreamer. From weekly events to immersive signature programs, special events, and on-demand content, our free programming and resources are designed to bring you inspiration, motivation, and support no matter your interest. DreamBank's mission also includes our commitment to bringing forward critical conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're honored to amplify speakers who represent the vibrant and varied dimensions of our ever-growing community of dreamers, and it is our earnest intention to offer content that leads to reflection, growth, and unity. We thank you for taking time today to learn alongside us. Before we kick off today's event, I'd like to highlight a few upcoming DreamBank offerings. We have a great Hispanic Heritage Month celebration featuring keynote Saul Flores that will be held at DreamBank on September 19th from 5 to 7 p.m. There will be delicious Hispanic food, Latin music, dancing, and of course, Saul's keynote with grit. Also, registration for our annual Dream Summit is live, and you can find more details about our upcoming events and register for these events on our website, which is amfam.com/DreamBank. And now, I'm thrilled to introduce you to our speaker, Diana Pastrana. Diana is the visionary and founder of Defyne LLC, dedicated to helping organizations grow through conflict. With an impressive track record for spanning over a decade, she has worked across diverse industries, honing her skills in cultivating more inclusive teams. Notably, Diana holds the Inclusion Institute Certified Diversity Practitioner designation and holds a certificate of conflict resolution from Cornell University. Please join me in welcoming Diana. Thank you so much for being here, Diana. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much. I am just going to pop up my screen here. Hopefully everyone can see that. And thanks for putting where you are from in the chat. Keep those coming. So yes, today we are talking about empowering women's futures. And I just wanted to start with a little bit of common language for the chat. So in the chat, one thing I always like to introduce is the concept of ouch. So if someone, including myself as the presenter, says something that you find offensive in the presentation, or maybe just is really, you felt it and it hurt, you can just say ouch. Now that's not an invitation to get into an argument in the chat. It's just noting it, right? It's just noting it, and then we're going to move on from it. And it's just a good way to kind of release some of those things. These important conversations around women and equity and all these things can bring up sometimes some interesting feelings. Another one that I love is yes and. If it's really good to reinforce agreement when it truly exists, and it's perfectly acceptable to build on one another's experience. So if you're sharing an experience in the chat and you see someone commented and you're like, yes, I agree with you completely, that's a great phrase to use in the chat. And then I have a different perspective or experience. That is totally okay too. We do not always completely agree with one another, right? We've experienced different things. We're going to talk a lot about this in this conversation today. So just a couple things for the chat to use today and then in the future, right? Like you can use these things at presentations across the board. So thank you for that wonderful introduction. Again, I'm Diana Pastrana. I use she, her pronouns. As mentioned, I have that certificate from Cornell in conflict management, and then I'm an Inclusion Institute Certified Diversity Practitioner. So we'll be talking a lot about diversity today. I am the founder of Defyne LLC, where we offer ombud services, workplace mediation, group facilitation, and then public speaking and workshops like I'm doing today with you all. We're heavily focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. And then if any of you use personality insights to get to know people, I just thought I'd share a couple of mine. So I am a D on the DISC scale. Is anyone familiar with DISC? I am like on the outside rim and like very centered D. I am about as D as they get. D for Diana. And then I am an 8 on the Enneagram scale. That personality insight has kind of blown up recently, but I've loved the Enneagram scale for many, many, many years. I am an ENTP-T on the Myers-Briggs scales. I don't even know what that means, but hopefully it's a good thing. And then my number one strength finder is an activator. So I love starting things, don't always love finishing things, but we'll get you here through today. But I'm just one woman, right? And there are so many women in this world, in this country, in this area. And so I want to start by talking today about the collective experience of women, right? What do we experience based on our gender and the collective experience? And we're going to start by talking about the challenges facing women today. So Women's Equality Day is celebrating the amendment to the Constitution that gave us the right to vote 104 years ago. And the amendment was passed in 1920, and it banned states and the federal government from withholding the right to vote based on sex. So 104 years later, let's talk about what's going on. So in 2023, women working full-time year-round earned 84% of what men earned. So 84 cents on the dollar. Now, I just want to take a moment to think about what does that mean for women who are working, who are maybe not partnered or single parents or things like that, to earn less income for those households. And then according to the UN, on top of being paid less for our labor in the workplace, women perform approximately 4 hours of unpaid labor in the home compared to men's 2.5. So not only are we being paid less, but we're doing more labor for free. So I will potentially refer to that throughout this talk as the mental load that women bear. And then in 2023, women made up less than 30% of the House of Representatives, the Senate, Fortune 500 company CEOs, and governors nationwide. So our share of that that power, that representation is less than half, right? Even though women now make up over half the population. And then healthcare discrimination exists in 40% of countries worldwide. And I would say before you think, oh, that's not a problem in the United States, it definitely is, especially for women of color and in certain states. So this is a good representation of some of the progress we've really made. Since 2010, women have increased their share in the Women's World Cup. So think professional soccer, right? So, you know, in what is that, 13 years max, 10, 13, or 12, 13 years, we've seen the increase of the acknowledgement and the financial reward for winning the Women's World Cup. However, it's still approximately a quarter of what the men earn. Just as an example. So the one thing I wanted to start talking about is a little bit about the work environment. So this is what I call the sweetheart effect, right? And you can put it in the chat. Everyone has probably been called a sweetheart or honey in the workplace, in the grocery store, wherever you are. And this is an example of a microaggression. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the term microaggression, it's an indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group. And we just talked about, right? Women are a marginalized group. Now, microaggressions is normally saved for people of color, right? And other people. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more as we go. But I want to tell a story, and feel free to share your experiences in the chat if you're interested. But I was doing a performance review before I started my own company many years ago, with a manager. And this performance review was probably one of the best performance reviews I have ever had, right? They're telling me how wonderfully I'm doing and I'm accomplishing all my goals and I'm succeeding with my goals and all of these things, right? And then toward the end, probably 58 minutes into the hour, my manager says, you know, there's just one thing I would like you to work on. And I said, okay, like I'm here for it. I'm expecting feedback. And he said, I would like you to work on being more likable. And I said, more likable? I'm very likable. People love me. Like I have friends and colleagues that enjoy my company. What do you mean you want me to be more likable? And then I got a little defensive. And I said, are you sharing the same feedback with the executives, the male executives that I'm working with, right? And so what I was experiencing was a microaggression. And oftentimes when we're experiencing a microaggression, it's kind of like, is anybody else seeing this? Like it makes us doubt ourselves. It makes us question if we are witnessing what we really are witnessing. Now, this was a great leader, right? But this broke down trust for me because it made me feel unsafe, knowing that this standard existed. And I'm going to bring this into the double bind. So this is sourced from the Catalyst, the double bind dilemma for women in leadership. And it's kind of the doomed if you do, doomed if you don't. We're either too soft, too tough. It's never just right. And I hope that you don't experience this, but I'm guessing one or two of us have. So the gender stereotypes create no-win situations for women, especially women in leadership. Okay. So the stereotype, and I'm going to go into this in more depth, but men take charge, and women take care, right? Just let that sink in a little bit. So men are strong, decisive, assertive, right? And women are caring, we're nurturing, we're emotional, we're communicative. So the double bind is that when women take charge, they're viewed as competent leaders, but disliked. And when women take care, they're liked, but they're not viewed as competent leaders. And we see this quite frequently, right? And so the result is women are seen as competent or likable, but rarely both. So I guess given my previous experience, my previous story, I can be grateful that I was viewed as competent, right? And so these are kind of the shared experiences that we have as women, right? We experience these things that make us question if we're in the right space, we're in the right time. And I want to go into this a little bit more at the end, but I just want to think about for a second the experiences we've all had individually as well. So we go back to this wonderful group of women who have different beliefs, different sizes, different, shapes and colors, right? And I want to think about the unique experience of individual women. So what is diversity? Put it in the chat for me, please, if you can. What is your definition of diversity? What does diversity do for us as a society? Anyone want to share the definition, your definition of diversity? Diversity is life. I love that one. Exposure to different cultures, absolutely. Diversity is the variety of people and experiences that make up a team or an organization. Embracing of differences in backgrounds, races, gender identities, income level, acknowledging and accepting, yes. Nature is diversity. I love looking at biodiversity in the world of diversity. Yes. So the definition that I have for you today is diversity is acknowledging the differences that exist amongst people. And then I add in parentheses, but all caps, and celebrating. Diversity is acknowledging and celebrating the differences that exist amongst people. So this is going to be an introduction to the dimensions of diversity, which is something I learned through the IICDP certification that I did. So let's start with, who am I? Right? I gave you my introduction earlier. I showed you my accreditations. You can see me, so you can see a little bit of who I am. But let's talk about the dimensions. So in our core, everyone has their own identity. And if you can take out a piece of pen and paper or just chat along, I'm not going to ask anyone to share this in the chat, but if you want to, you can. Okay. So the primary dimension of diversity is what we most often think of as diversity. We think of race, gender, physical and mental ability, age, and class, right? These are also some of the most visible dimension. This is the most visible dimension of diversity, right? So ethnicity and race, age, gender identity, sexual orientation, these things can be very visible, right? So it's the 7 protected classes, it's the things that we think about with diversity. So if you did get out a paper and pen, or you're typing along in your notes, start making a list of the things that you identify most with. And it's possible that you may really strongly identify with your ethnicity or your race, or it's possible that you don't think about it very often, but it is a part of your experience in this world. Maybe you think about your age a lot. Maybe you think about it once a year on your birthday. And then the secondary dimension of diversity is a little less visible, right? And some of these things are more about how we are and what stage of life we're in, right? But like your political views can make you very diverse from the people you work with or the people you're friends with. Your language or your accent, that's something you might not think about if you live in Wisconsin and are surrounded by people from Wisconsin. But if you came from somewhere else to Wisconsin, you might think about your language or your accent quite frequently. And I know we have people from all over the place. So I think we have probably many people with different language and accents on this call. Your parental or familial status, right? As women, there's a lot of variety in how people are in marital and romantic relationships. Geographic location, military experience. Think about if you were a woman in active military, how different your experience might be from civilian life. And then education, right? We still see women slightly underrepresented in higher education and the ability to gain access to higher education. The third dimension of diversity is organizational. So this is where you fall within an organization in a work-related context, maybe your network, your work experience, your role in a company, your management status, your location. All of these things create diversity in your workplaces. And then cultural. So the cultural dimension of diversity when I'm working with organizations and conflict is the one that I see the most conflict coming out of, right? So whether you're a competitive person or a cooperative person, whether you're an individual person or a team player, how you like to resolve conflict sometimes can create conflict. Doing your time management, your body language, right? These are all things that we see. And then the one that I'd like to point out is power and authority views. Power and authority views, as women, we can see these things slightly differently than our male counterparts, right? We have a different lived experience. But out of all of this, I just want to point out that gender is only one of these things. So to assume that we have similar experiences all the time when there are so many things, so many more things that are mentioned on these slides, to see gender as one item, right? Or gender identity, maybe. is one item, and all of these other things make us unique and give us unique experiences. So next I want to speak to intersectionality, right? And this is kind of what I'm leading up to here with this dimensions of diversity. So intersectionality is the interconnected nature of social categorization such as race, class, gender, as they apply to any given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. So, like I said, women do experience microaggressions, but BIPOC women, Black, Indigenous people of color, may experience microaggressions for both the color of their skin, their race, and the fact that they're a woman. So we see this kind of interlapping effects of women and experience of women. LGBTQ women, specifically trans women, Black trans women are the group in the United States that are the most likely to receive violence for their identity. Women with disability. So microaggressions are compounding, right? And they're, again, a unique experience to each person's identity. But words matter. So why don't we put in the chat, what words would you use to describe how women are expected to act or to be? So you can give me a list of words, you can give me a single word. What words would you use to describe how women are expected to act or be? Demir, thank you. Cutesy, together, always, people-pleasing, ladylike, kind. I just want to say the fact that we even have something called ladylike, right, implies that we have a type: quiet, gentle, always available, patient, helpful. Yes, these are all, yes, accepting abuse, very kind, caring, lovely. So I decided to ask ChatGPT. I decided to do my own little research, and I said, ChatGPT, what are the 10 most common words to describe women? Does anyone want to put a guess in the chat for the number one word used to describe women on the internet? Caring, mom, nice, honey, pretty, mother, yes. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say all the words in the chat right now, but you see them. So beautiful was the number one word. And I thought about this today while I was getting ready. I'm curling my hair, I'm doing my makeup, I'm putting on lipstick. I'm thinking, how am I perpetuating this exact definition of a woman, right? We're supposed to be beautiful. And then here's the other top 9 answers. Oop, if I can get there. We're supposed to be sensitive, nurturing, passive, supportive, emotional, elegant, intuitive, submissive, talkative, right? This is, sorry, but the Mad Men era version of how we view women. And this is today, right? This is today. These are the 10 most common words used to describe women. So I got curious at this point, and I thought, how would ChatGPT describe Black women? And this was the only time when I did this search that I was given a prompt from ChatGPT that said that Black women should always be referred to in respectful and courteous ways, right? So this is a filtered list, but the number one word to describe Black women, does anybody want to put a guess in the chat? And again, it's a filter chat. Angry, yep, we've heard that. Loud. Outspoken, strong, aggressive, yeah. So we see the words shift, right? Even that we assume that people might say about Black women versus white women. So sometimes when we're describing the experience of women, we are focusing that narrative on white women, right? So the number one word was strong. Somebody got it right. I didn't see who. But the number one word to describe Black women on the internet was strong. Now I want you to look at this list and how different it is when I called out a specific race of women, a specific ethnicity of women. Resilience, right? I saw a Black woman post recently on LinkedIn saying she doesn't want to live a resilient life. She wants to live a soft life. And I felt that so deep in my core, right? Beautiful still made the list. Empowered, intelligent, creative, ambitious, inspirational, graceful, right? So we see a little different narrative here. And I just wanted to show you this because I found it so interesting that, again, we oftentimes center white women in our stories and in our descriptors of women, and it shifts. So then for fun, I looked up what the 10 most common words to describe men was. Anyone have any guesses on the 10 most common words to describe men? Strong, 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 handsome, manly, masculine, aggressive, breadwinner, smart. Yes. So, yes, there it is, leader. The number one word to describe men was leadership. So, as a society, as an internet, as a chat GPT, we see men as leaders and we see women as beautiful, right? It's kind of eye-opening when you think about it, that these are the things. And then we see this whole word bubble come through, right? Ambitious, strategic, influential, driven, decisive, innovative, entrepreneurial, professional, confident. I'm sorry, but I want this list, right? Like, and maybe not everybody does. That's totally fine too. But like, I view myself as entrepreneurial and decisive and driven and professional and leadership. But what's also missing is the identity of men who don't align with these professional aspirations, right? Is people who would prefer to stay and make a home or with children. So we see this kind of double bind across both categories. So I want to talk about unconscious bias. If anybody does not know, the definition of unconscious bias is social stereotypes about certain groups of people that individuals form outside of their own conscious awareness. So how do we fight unconscious bias? We make it conscious, right? Like we think about it. We acknowledge the things we're thinking, our actions that might lead to these microaggressions against minority groups of people. And I'm going to tell you, we can be unconsciously biased against women as women. And just let that sink in a little bit, because a lot of people think, oh, well, I can't be unconsciously biased against women because I am a woman, right? But it's super, super important to acknowledge this. And I see it quite frequently. I did a presentation within the last year talking about the unwritten rules of being a woman in the workplace. And there was a lot of leaders in this room, right? It was a fully, women and non-binary group of people. And so many people spoke to their own experiences of being unconsciously biased against people and being judged by other women, right? So we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but think to yourself a little bit, right? Take some notes. What biases do you hold, whether they're conscious or unconscious, against women, against intersectional identities, or other minority groups, right? Like, so think back to those dimensions of diversity, all of those things that make up the identity of someone, the identity of you, and think about what are some things that maybe you grapple with, that you have some internal discord about, that you could name, right? Because the first thing we can do to create, to fight unconscious bias is to create conscious action. around these things, right? Because then we can change. Our thoughts change our actions. And if we're aware of our thoughts, we can change our actions. And then it's really important to acknowledge that no group thrives until all groups thrive. So the reason I say this is because oftentimes when we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, we're talking about women, it can be at the expense of men, right? But it's not a pie. There is plenty to go around, right? And so taking an equitable share or an equal share of something does not leave less for other people. And this is also important in allyship for other minority groups of women or groups of people, right? Like the BIPOC community, things like that. Because we all need to support each other. We all need to come up together. So here's another good conversation for the chat. What makes environments healthy? So you could think about workplaces, friend groups. What makes environments that you exist in healthy? Give me some descriptive words. Give me some adjectives in the chat. Trust. Absolutely. Respect. Safety. Contentment. Communication. Yep. Compassion and empathy, trust and respect. I'm seeing respect a lot. Yeah, very good. So I have a couple definitions here. I have collaborative, supportive, respectful environments that increase the participation and contribution of all people. So you can have respectful environments, you can have supportive environments, but if you're not seeing an increase in participation from your users, maybe you need to think again. But the idea of safety so that people can feel that they can contribute and participate in an environment. And then the full engagement of the individual, sharing power at all levels of an organization. So think about that. Did anybody get uncomfortable when I said sharing power at all levels of the organization? Because sometimes when I read that, I think, oh my gosh, like, could you imagine if all individuals shared power, right? Like, what a change that would be. And then when members are valued, again, respected and supported. So does anybody know what these are characteristics of? You can drop it in the chat. Diversity. Anyone else? So these are characteristics of inclusion. Yes, thank you. But one thing that I like to talk about, besides what inclusion is, right? Because inclusion can be a little pie in the sky, right? People have very different definitions of inclusion, very different examples of inclusion. But inclusion is not. So what is inclusion not? Inclusion is not conform to our social norms and we will accept you. And this is really important because I think this really puts a pin in inclusion and gives people an idea of when they are being inclusive and when they are not. So conform to our social norm. What's an example of that, right? I always use on Wednesdays, we wear pink. Okay, so Mean Girls reference for anybody who was in that movie. The example is that she's invited into the group, which might feel like inclusion, but she says, or the group says, you have to wear pink to be included in our group on Wednesdays. And there's all these other rules to sit at their table and to participate in their environment. And what inclusion is truly is come to our table as yourself. Show up as yourself. Increase your participation as yourself, and we will accept you. So if you're looking at this from a workplace perspective, if you're looking at this from a friend's perspective, ask yourself, are you including all women, right? Or are you inviting women to the table and asking them to act in a man's world, right? Earlier, I said that I want the man's list. Well, is that me just being conditioned to want workplace success and I view myself in a manly way that way, right? Like, how can we be included truly? And how do we break the mold? So let's talk about some solutions. Let's talk about some opportunities here to create a difference for our situation. I've talked a lot about kind of the bring me down moments of the day, right? But so how do we break the mold? So first we need to interrupt biases, our own and others, right? We need to speak up if we notice colleagues or friends using words that reinforce gender stereotypes. This is really important. Phrases like, she's abrasive, she's emotional, she talks too much, right? And we might use these phrases too. So we have to say, hey, if we say these things, we have to be like, oh, okay, maybe we're judging her differently than we would judge someone else. And then this one's really important. It's probably my favorite tip, is be a visible champion. So a champion is someone who's going to promote the accomplishments of women or girls, and actively advocate for their development and advancement. So if you have power or authority, right, in your work environment, think about what you can do to advocate for women, to advocate for minority groups, because we all rise together, remember? To shed some of your light on another person. And then women and allies supporting women. So like women supporting women has been this like amazing force throughout our history, right? Like we see women rising up together, but really we need allies as well. So I don't know if there are any men on the call or people who would consider themselves a non-woman, but we need to stop competing, right? As women, we're pitted against each other. These societal norms of how we're supposed to act and how we're supposed to engage and how many seats at the table there are puts us in competition. And we need to offer each other mentorship. And we need to be mentored, right? Like I love being mentored by other women. I think it's incredibly important, and not to compete. And then going back to that definition of diversity, right? We need to acknowledge the differences that are between us. We need to celebrate them. And we need to assume that we have both shared but also unique experiences. And then we need to listen to hear those different experiences that are different than yours, right? Because they're also valid. They're all the experiences, right, are so valid. And then we need to accept all women. This is one thing that I see a lot of people struggle with, right? Is that we tend to gatekeep what it means to be a woman, right? But we can support trans women. We can support women who choose not to have families or children, right? They are going to experience very different things in life than a woman who chooses to have children. And that women don't always act or look like we judge a woman to be, right? Or what we might judge. So like we have to keep open-minded to this idea. One example of this is the term professional, right? Like people say we should act professional. Well, what does that mean? Who's defining what professionalism is? Maybe it's professional to show emotion. Maybe it's professional to show a tattoo. Why do we need to gatekeep that for women? So that's something I would love everyone to just think about. And then women and allies. So putting your money, putting your time where your interests are, right, to help the cause. So supporting nonprofits that uplift girls and women. Like I think about Girls Who Code, Girls on the Run, Big Brother, Big Sisters, right? For women who've suffered domestic violence, there's lots of good resources out there and nonprofits that can help get them back on their feet and live a life of freedom, right? So supporting those organizations, support women-owned businesses, myself included. Yeah, if you have a women-owned business, put it in the chat, please. I would love to see or organizations that you like to support for women that support women and girls. Please, please, please put those resources in the chat. And then one thing I always love to say is start in grade schools and high schools. People want more women represented in different organizations, in different industries, right? But we have to start with the children. We have to start with young women and girls so that we can bring them up believing in themselves. We can empower that belief in themselves. And then again, and always mentorship. And then this one can be a little bit controversial, but we need to treat men equally too, right? And these are specifically around men who choose to have families, but offering paternity leave to men means that women will not be punished for taking maternity leave, right? And then don't punish men for childcare responsibilities. So we need to level out that playing field. We need to let them do some of that more unpaid labor, right? Like, so picking up children from school or doing housework, things like that, not just thinking of them as those providers, those leaders, but thinking of them as contributing. Oh my gosh, I'm loving all the resources in the chat. Thank you. And then let's talk about the definition of empowerment. So the authority or power given to someone to do something. So this is the best way, I think, in my mind, you can be an ally, is think about what authority or power you have to give, right? And not always is it in the workplace, right? Sometimes it's a microphone. Sometimes it's DreamBank giving me the stage to talk about these things with you, right? And it's giving someone that power and authority, taking it from you and giving it to them, and giving them something, giving them a purpose to move forward on. And it's super important as women that we have this, right? And that we support each other in this. And this can be allies or it can be other women. Yes, I see in the chat, being a mom to talk to the next generation. Absolutely. So what can we commit to? What can we do? After all, we are just women, right? So this is a format that I love in my talks, that if you came today, you showed up, you listened, that's great, right? Learning is so important. Hopefully you learned something, but we commit to doing something after the fact and we can really improve our existence, right? Like we don't want to just learn and walk away. So what is something we can start doing, stop doing, and keep doing? So you're welcome to put it in the chat. You're welcome to just take a moment to take some notes on something that, now that you've seen this perspective, right? What is something? And it can be very small. It should be small, right? That you can start doing, stop doing, and keep doing. And that just gives you a slightly different perspective on how to look at things. And that's me. So thank you all very much. I hope that you had some good takeaways. And I appreciate your time. And I can take some questions in the chat if people have them.
Thanks so much, Diana. We'll give people a second or two just to drop their questions in the chat, but that was such a great presentation. So thank you so much. So many good takeaways.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was so cool to see everyone sharing their resources in the chat as well.
Ah, I loved that part. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen if that's okay. Is that good? Okay. I'm loving the conversation in the chat. Does anybody have any questions?
Diana, I'll jump in here. We know our audience today is made up of fellow fearless dreamers, and here at DreamBank, we believe in the transformative power of dreams, and we believe in that the pursuit of a dream is as noble as its achievement. So before we conclude, as a DreamBank tradition, I'd like to ask you a two-part question. One, what dream are you currently pursuing? And two, what's one piece of advice you would offer to someone who is pursuing a dream right now?
Such a good question. So I think I started my company 2 years ago, but I am very much still pursuing that dream, right? Making that the company that I wanted it to be, helping people in organizations have a voice and conflict and autonomy and agency in their life. Um, but I would say my advice is like, if you have a dream and you really want it, you have to want it more than like anything else. Like you have to not be able to do it, something different to be able to achieve that dream. And I've made so many big life-changing decisions in order to be able to pursue this dream of starting this company. And dreams take sacrifices and vision and motivation. And so it's just really important to really think about, I guess, how bad you want it, right? And to know it. So
Definitely. Well, thank you for sharing with us. I did see another question come in. How do we deal with gender stereotypes being perpetuated? Sorry, I'm
perpetuated. Yeah.
perpetuated by other women we work with again.
Yeah. Well, send them this recording to start with. But sometimes it's just drawing awareness in the kindest way we can, right? So it's not necessarily blaming, but when you can acknowledge something like a conflict in the workplace around gender stereotypes, right? You can go to them, try to put yourself on the same side of the problem as them. So you're not looking for forgiveness, you're not looking for acceptance, you're looking for understanding. So if you understand this, you're trying to improve their understanding of the situation. So if you can kind of step onto the same side of the problem with them and then talk through it with them, right? So a potential example of this could be like, hey, I've recognized when so and so enters a meeting, you ask them to take notes every time. Maybe it would be beneficial to spread out that responsibility on other people so that it's not always the only woman in the meeting taking notes, and then you could explain kind of why, right? But like that's an example, right? That if you're the woman in the meeting, oftentimes people will ask you, and I've done this to women myself, right? Like very high powered women. So we need to draw awareness and kind of intervene on those actions.
Okay, we have another question here. You mentioned the phrase start doing, stop doing. What was the third part to that?
Keep doing.
Keep
So
doing. There
keep
we go.
doing is my favorite part to it because it's like, what am I doing really, really well? What is something that I'm making an impact doing already? What is something I want to continue to be focused on and keep doing?
Yes, I absolutely love that. All right, well, we will go ahead and wrap up for today. Diana, thank you so
Sounds
much for
good.
sharing your time and insights with us today. This was truly such an impactful session. This was the perfect
Thank you.
way for, our community of dreamers to learn, grow, and celebrate women today and every day. To all who joined us for this session, thank you for being here. Learn more about DreamBank's free upcoming programming at amfam.com/DreamBank and by connecting with us on our social channels. And if you're interested in revisiting this event or exploring past ones, our YouTube channel is the place to be. On behalf of the American Family Insurance DreamBank, we look forward to hosting you again soon. Until then, keep dreaming fearlessly. Thank you.